Welcome back to the channel, and thank you for joining me tonight. In today's episode, we'll drift back to a time over a century ago, to the world of Victorian England, a world of top hats, corsets, and horse-drawn carriages. But beneath the charm and etiquette, love and dating were far from what we imagine today. In fact, dating in Victorian England, well, it kinda sucked. Imagine, if you will, a young person in Victorian England, perhaps a teenage girl or a young man just on the cusp of adulthood, standing at the threshold of a world that is as fascinating as it is constraining. The air smells faintly of coal smoke from the city streets, and the distant clop of horses' hooves echoes against the cobblestones. The streets are lined with gas lamps casting a soft golden glow over horse-drawn carriages, and the distant murmur of people attending social gatherings drifts on the evening air. Everything about this era, from the architecture to the fashion, from the spoken words to the most subtle gestures, was governed by an intricate set of rules, a web of societal expectations that made the simple act of meeting someone you were drawn to into a carefully choreographed, often exhausting ritual. For young Victorians, the idea of love, passion, and desire was never truly simple. It was not like today, where a glance across a coffee shop or a quick message on a phone can spark a romantic connection. Instead, relationships were constructed on the foundation of etiquette, social standing, and propriety. To fall in love, or even to express affection, was to enter a minefield of potential missteps. One wrong gesture, one improperly chosen word, could cause scandal, offend a family, or ruin a budding relationship before it had even begun. It is almost unimaginable from a modern perspective how restricted and delicate these interactions were. Let us start with the idea of supervision. Young men and women could not simply wander off together, meet casually, or share moments of intimacy without scrutiny. Chaperones were an ever-present part of the landscape, and their role was to ensure that nothing improper occurred or even appeared to occur. A mother, an aunt, or a family friend might accompany a young woman during social visits, tea parties, walks in the garden, or carriage rides. These guardians were not simply passive observers. They were vigilant, always watching for any hint of impropriety, ready to intervene if a conversation, a glance, or a smile veered too close to the forbidden. Even in the quietest, most serene settings, such as the drawing room of a family home, these young people were acutely aware of the invisible gaze of propriety. Every interaction had to be measured, every movement considered. When a young man approached a young woman for conversation, he did so with a careful bow, a measured tone of voice, and often with a pre-prepared script in mind. There was no room for improvisation, no freedom to express spontaneous emotion. A casual remark that might seem harmless today could be interpreted as audacious or even offensive. For young women, the stakes were even higher. To laugh too freely, to blush too eagerly, or to meet a man's gaze too directly could spark rumors or jeopardize their reputation. Virtue, modesty, and restraint were the invisible currency of social approval, and they had to be carefully maintained at all costs. Letters were a vital tool in this constrained world of courtship. A young man would often resort to pen and paper as his safest means of communication, crafting letters with painstaking care. These were not simple notes saying, "I like you," or "Will you meet me?" No, these were elaborate documents, often composed in flowing script, brimming with delicate phrasing, subtle compliments, and even poetic verses. Words were chosen with precision because a single phrase could tip the balance between propriety and scandal. Families sometimes intercepted these letters, reading them before they reached their intended recipient. A poorly worded line could spark disapproval or even reprimand. Young women, in turn, had to respond with equal care. Enthusiasm could signal impropriety, yet a cold or dismissive reply could offend a suitor and his family. They were expected to maintain an elegant balance, expressing interest without compromising their reputation, showing restraint without signaling rejection. Imagine the psychological strain of this reality. Young people of the era were constantly negotiating their desires against the backdrop of societal scrutiny. They learned early that emotion, when displayed openly, could be dangerous. This created a world in which the language of love was coded, subtle, and indirect. A smile, a bow, or a tilt of the head could carry meaning that would be understood only by those attuned to the unspoken rules of courtship. Entire social lives revolved around interpreting gestures, reading between the lines of letters, and navigating carefully the labyrinth of etiquette that governed every interaction. And yet, despite the constraints, the human heart persisted. Young Victorians felt the stirrings of affection, the pangs of attraction, and the longing for companionship, just as anyone does. Perhaps it was in the quiet moments, during a stroll in the garden, where one could exchange a carefully moderated glance, or in the subtle thrill of receiving a letter in a carefully folded envelope, that young people experienced their first taste of romantic emotion. These moments, though small and meticulously supervised, carried an intensity precisely because they were so rare, so carefully controlled. Every glance, every word, every gesture was imbued with heightened significance, magnified by the knowledge that it must be perfect, measured, and appropriate. Family influence added yet another layer of complexity. Parents had the ultimate authority in approving or rejecting a potential suitor. This was not merely about ensuring financial security or social standing, although those were crucial factors. It was also about reputation, morality, and maintaining the decorum of the household. A young person could be drawn to someone in their heart, but if the family disapproved, the budding romance was often stifled. This could lead to frustration, heartbreak, and a sense of helplessness, as the forces of propriety and duty outweighed personal desire. The young person had to learn patience, discretion, and, above all, self-control skills that were as essential to social survival as they were to romantic success. Even the most ordinary social gatherings were meticulously structured. Balls, dinners, and garden parties were not merely opportunities for entertainment. They were strategic venues for observation, evaluation, and subtle negotiation. Young men and women were carefully watched, and every interaction was noted, discussed, and evaluated by family members. It was not enough simply to attend. One had to perform, to demonstrate grace, wit, and charm, while adhering to the unspoken rules of courtship. These events were both thrilling and exhausting, offering glimpses of connection while constantly reminding participants of the ever-present constraints. In addition to family supervision, social gossip played a powerful role in shaping behavior. Rumors, whispers, and even the faintest insinuations could have lasting consequences. A young woman's reputation could be tarnished by a simple misunderstanding, and a young man's honor could be questioned by a single misstep. This heightened awareness of public perception created an environment in which young people learned to mask their emotions, to carefully script their interactions, and to find subtle, almost invisible ways to communicate their affection. Love became a delicate dance, conducted not only between two hearts, but also within the intricate web of societal expectation. It is also worth noting that Victorian England placed immense value on appearances. Clothing, posture, and demeanor were all indicators of character, virtue, and suitability as a partner. A young woman might spend hours preparing her dress, carefully arranging her hair, and practicing the appropriate gestures for social interaction. A young man, similarly, would take care to present himself with confidence, dignity, and propriety. Every detail mattered because each interaction was a test, a performance in which the stakes were nothing less than social approval, family honor, and the potential for future happiness. The weight of these expectations cannot be overstated. Young people had to internalize an entire system of etiquette, anticipate the reactions of multiple parties, and constantly regulate their behavior. Every thought, word, and action was filtered through layers of social conditioning, family expectation, and cultural norms. The simple act of expressing interest in someone became a complex, high-stakes exercise in strategy, patience, and self-restraint. To navigate this world successfully required intelligence, grace, emotional control, and, above all, the ability to read the subtle signals of others. Yet, despite all these obstacles, young people found ways to express their feelings, to connect, and to experience the joys of affection, however fleeting or carefully managed. The letters filled with hidden meanings, stolen glances, and carefully orchestrated encounters allowed them to communicate emotions that could not otherwise be spoken. In a society that demanded restraint, these small acts of daring became the vessels of romantic expression. The intensity of these experiences, magnified by the constraints of etiquette, created emotional landscapes as vivid and profound as any love story we know today. And so, life in Victorian England for a young person on the cusp of love was both enchanting and exhausting. The streets and drawing rooms were filled with possibility, yet every possibility was framed by limitation. Every smile, bow, or written word carried weight far beyond its appearance. Romance was a performance, a strategic negotiation, and an exercise in patience and subtlety. And yet, within this structured world, the human heart persisted, seeking connection, yearning for understanding, and daring, even in the quietest, most controlled ways, to hope for love. As we drift gently into sleep, it is fascinating to imagine ourselves in this world, where the most ordinary gestures could carry extraordinary meaning, where love was at once constrained and heightened by rules, and where every letter, glance, and gesture told a story of longing, courage, and the timeless human desire for connection. In Victorian England, the concept of love was rarely as simple as two hearts meeting and intertwining. Instead, it was inextricably linked to social class, wealth, and the expectations of family. The young people of this era lived in a society defined by hierarchies, by lines drawn as clearly as the streets of London or the walls of a stately manor. To fall in love, or even to entertain the thought of romance, was to navigate a complex network of social rules, obligations, and unwritten contracts that extended far beyond the simple desire for companionship. For a young woman, the idea of romance was often intertwined with the practical concerns of security and stability. Many families viewed marriage as a means to secure a comfortable life, improve social standing, or forge advantageous connections. Love, while sometimes considered a desirable bonus, was rarely the primary goal. Parents and relatives had a clear vision for their children's futures, and they often exercised careful control over the process of courtship to ensure that it aligned with the family's interests. A suitor's wealth, property, and social position were scrutinized just as closely as his manners, education, and moral character. A young woman might dream of a love that ignited spontaneously, full of warmth and excitement, yet she would find that her desires were filtered, shaped, and constrained by the pragmatic concerns of her family and the broader society in which she lived. A young man, on the other hand, was often judged by his capacity to provide. Financial stability was not merely a suggestion, it was an expectation. To be considered a suitable suitor, a man had to demonstrate that he could maintain a household, support a family, and uphold the dignity and social standing of his future bride. This requirement added enormous pressure. A man might possess all the qualities of character, intelligence, and charm, yet if his fortune was deemed insufficient, he could be dismissed as an unsuitable match. This emphasis on wealth and status created a world in which genuine affection was always entwined with practical calculation. Love, when it existed, was often overshadowed by the necessity to secure a future that was deemed respectable and sustainable. Social gatherings, while seemingly leisurely, were often subtle venues of negotiation. Balls, dinners, garden parties, and country events served multiple purposes. They were opportunities to enjoy culture, music, and companionship, but they were also arenas in which potential matches were assessed. Young people attended these events with acute awareness, observing each other and being observed in turn. Families watched closely, evaluating not only behavior, but also physical appearance, demeanor, and social aptitude. Every dance, every conversation, every fleeting smile could influence the course of a young person's romantic prospects. A misstep could lead to social embarrassment, while a well-executed performance could increase a young person's desirability. It is easy to imagine the frustration this caused. A young man or woman might feel a deep connection, a spark of mutual interest, yet that connection could be thwarted by the invisible barriers of class and wealth. A girl from a modest background might find herself captivated by a wealthy gentleman, but her family would likely discourage or outright forbid such a union. Conversely, a young man from a lower income family could admire a woman from a higher social echelon, yet societal expectations would make any pursuit almost impossible. The heart's desire was often secondary to the practical realities of life, and this tension created a constant undercurrent of longing and restraint. Education and accomplishment also played a role in determining romantic suitability. For young women, accomplishments such as music, painting, embroidery, and proficiency in languages were considered essential. These skills demonstrated refinement, culture, and the ability to contribute to a household in ways beyond the domestic. They were subtle markers of social class and status, reflecting not only personal talent but also the family's capacity to provide a proper upbringing. For young men, education and professional prospects were equally important. A gentleman with a strong education, a promising career, or connections in politics or commerce was far more attractive in the eyes of families concerned with securing advantageous alliances. Letters, diaries, and memoirs from the era reveal the emotional weight of these expectations. Young people were acutely aware that their social standing dictated the limits of their romantic freedom. Some wrote with longing about the pain of being separated from someone they admired simply because the family deemed the match inappropriate. Others documented the anxiety of meeting potential suitors whom they had little interest in, knowing that their duty was to be polite, gracious, and obedient to family wishes. The tension between personal desire and societal expectation shaped nearly every interaction and left many feeling frustrated, constrained, and at times heartbroken. Even subtle choices in daily life were scrutinized for their social implications. The neighborhoods in which one lived, the carriage one rode, the shops and promenades frequented, all signaled social standing. Young men and women were constantly aware of the messages they conveyed through these choices, as they could affect both their reputations and their prospects for love. Social mobility was possible but limited. and any deviation from the norms of appearance or behavior could have long, lasting consequences. Romance existed in a world of mirrors and reflections, where every movement had to be considered not only for personal meaning, but also for societal interpretation. The practicalities of wealth and property also influenced courtship in unexpected ways. Dowries, inheritances, and family connections were central to many negotiations. A young woman's family might have substantial property or financial assets that could be leveraged to secure a beneficial marriage. Similarly, a man's potential to inherit land, business interests, or titles could make him more attractive as a suitor, regardless of his personal qualities. These considerations often overrode individual preference, as families prioritized security, status, and long-term advantage. Love, when it appeared, had to navigate these practical currents, sometimes finding expression only in secret letters or fleeting glances. Despite these restrictions, young people often sought creative ways to express affection within the boundaries of propriety. Letters, carefully folded and hidden, served as vessels for emotion that could not be spoken aloud. Poetry, often written in elegant script, allowed young men and women to convey longing, admiration, and devotion without violating societal norms. Small gestures, like offering a favorite book or delicately arranging flowers, carried layers of meaning, signaling interest while remaining within the bounds of acceptable behavior. Every expression of affection was a subtle dance, performed with precision, discretion, and imagination. Travel and geographic mobility also shaped romantic possibilities. Many young people lived in small towns or rural areas, where opportunities to meet suitable partners were limited by social and economic factors. Visits to cities, theaters, or larger estates provided rare chances to encounter potential matches beyond one's immediate social circle. These excursions were often planned meticulously and supervised, ensuring that propriety was maintained even as young people experienced moments of freedom and excitement. The anticipation and tension of such occasions heightened the emotional intensity of interactions, making every glance, word, or gesture resonate with significance. In addition to family and social pressures, religion often played a significant role in determining acceptable matches. Families frequently prioritized alignment of faith and moral values, and marriages across differing religious denominations could be discouraged or forbidden. Young people had to navigate not only the expectations of social class and wealth, but also the spiritual and moral frameworks imposed by their families and communities. This layered complexity created a world in which romantic decisions were rarely simple, and where every choice carried long, lasting consequences. One can also consider the emotional impact of these constraints. Young people experienced longing, desire, and curiosity, yet they were taught to temper and control these emotions. Patience, discretion, and restraint were highly valued, often overshadowing personal passion or spontaneity. This environment fostered self-awareness, empathy, and skill in subtle communication, but it could also lead to frustration, sadness, and a sense of isolation. The intensity of emotion was magnified by the obstacles that stood in the way of fulfillment, creating a rich but often painful inner life. Despite all these challenges, some young Victorians did manage to find love within the confines of their social and economic realities. The relationships that succeeded often did so through a combination of careful strategy, emotional intelligence, and fortunate circumstances. Shared interests, mutual respect, and compatible values could sometimes bridge the gaps imposed by social class and wealth, allowing genuine affection to flourish. Yet even in these cases, the constraints of propriety and family expectation remained ever present, shaping the rhythm and trajectory of romantic relationships. The persistence of the human heart, even within such a structured environment, is remarkable. Young people found ways to express love, admiration, and desire, even when constrained by rules, social hierarchies, and financial considerations. They learned to interpret subtle signals, to craft letters and gestures with layered meanings, and to cherish fleeting moments of connection. In doing so, they created a world of romantic expression that was both delicate and profound, intricate and intense, proving that even in the most restrictive circumstances, the longing for connection and companionship endures. The interplay of wealth, class, and love also reveals much about the broader society of Victorian England. Social hierarchies were maintained not only through economic means, but also through patterns of marriage and courtship. Families used marital alliances to consolidate power, secure property, and reinforce social bonds. Young people, often unaware of the full scope of these negotiations, became participants in a system that intertwined personal emotion with societal strategy. The consequences of these arrangements extended beyond individual relationships, influencing social structures and community dynamics in ways that reverberated across generations. Romance, in this context, was a delicate balancing act. Young people had to navigate the tension between desire and duty, emotion and pragmatism, personal inclination and social expectation. Every choice carried significance, and every interaction was imbued with layers of meaning. In a society where social class and wealth governed nearly every aspect of life, love was both a personal experience and a public performance, a negotiation between the heart's longing and the family's calculation. Ultimately, understanding the role of social class and money in Victorian dating illuminates the extraordinary complexity of love during this period. It was not merely about attraction or compatibility. It was about navigating a world in which every decision was influenced by societal norms, family expectations, and economic realities. Young people learned to balance desire with prudence, passion with discretion, and personal aspiration with social responsibility. Their experiences remind us that love has always been shaped not only by the heart, but also by the intricate structures of the world around us. In the quiet hours of the evening, one can almost imagine a young woman sitting by the window of a candle-lit room, pen in hand, writing a letter that delicately expresses her admiration for a young man, all while carefully considering the consequences if her words were discovered. One can envision a young man rehearsing the perfect phrasing for a social encounter, striving to convey interest and respect without overstepping the bounds of propriety. These moments, steeped in careful thought and subtle emotion, reveal the extraordinary lengths to which young people went to navigate the complex terrain of Victorian romance. In the end, the weight of social class and money made dating in Victorian England a delicate, challenging, and often frustrating endeavor. Yet it also created a world in which the heart's longing was magnified, where small gestures carried immense significance, and where the art of subtle communication became a necessary skill. Within this structured environment, young people discovered resilience, creativity, and the enduring power of love, even when it had to exist within the strictest of boundaries. In Victorian England, courtship was far from the casual, spontaneous experience we often associate with modern dating. It was slow, deliberate, and governed by an intricate system of rules, expectations, and social rituals. For young people, falling in love was not simply a matter of meeting someone and expressing one's feelings. It was a painstaking, carefully measured process that could stretch over months or even years, a slow dance in which every movement had to be calculated and every gesture observed. To understand this world is to imagine a time when even the simplest interactions carried enormous weight, where the smallest misstep could have profound consequences, and where romance was both intensely desired and rigorously constrained. Picture a young woman in a drawing room, sitting by the window as sunlight filters through delicate lace curtains. She glances toward the doorway as a young man enters, and their eyes meet for a fleeting moment. That glance, though brief, is filled with meaning. It is observed not only by the participants themselves, but also by watchful chaperones, family members, and perhaps even the subtle judgment of society itself. Every interaction in this context was laden with significance, and both parties were acutely aware of the consequences of a misstep. The pace of courtship was dictated by social norms that prized patience, decorum, and propriety. A young man could not simply approach a woman and declare his feelings. Even expressing interest required a careful calculation of timing, appropriateness, and context. He might attend the same social gatherings, observe her from a respectful distance, and engage in carefully supervised conversation, all while maintaining a demeanor that was polite, charming, and utterly respectful. Any hint of eagerness or impropriety could be disastrous. Similarly, a young woman had to balance curiosity and interest with restraint and composure. To blush too readily, laugh too freely, or make an inappropriate comment could invite scandal, gossip, or disapproval from family and society. Communication often relied on subtle, indirect signals, a tilt of the head, a glance in the right direction, a carefully chosen phrase in conversation. Each could convey interest without violating the rules of propriety. Young people became skilled at reading these signals, interpreting the unspoken language of attraction that existed beneath the surface of polite social interaction. Letters also played a crucial role. Carefully penned notes allowed for the expression of feelings that could not safely be spoken aloud. These letters were often composed in elegant script, filled with coded expressions of admiration and longing. They were both a lifeline and a labyrinth, a way to convey emotion while navigating the constraints of a society that demanded discretion. The slow pace of courtship created an intensity that is difficult to imagine in modern terms. In a world where casual meetings were forbidden and private conversations were rare, each encounter carried enormous significance. A single evening at a ball or a carefully supervised garden party could define the trajectory of a young person's romantic life for months. The anticipation, the subtle exchanges, and the carefully observed rituals imbued every moment with heightened emotional weight. The young people involved had to cultivate patience, restraint, and a keen awareness of timing. To act too quickly was to risk scandal. To act too slowly could mean missing a rare opportunity. Social gatherings were carefully orchestrated and highly structured. Dances, for example, were not simply opportunities for enjoyment. They were vital arenas for courtship. Each dance was carefully arranged and monitored, with specific dances assigned to particular couples or social groups. A young man might spend weeks preparing for a single dance, ensuring that his manners, posture, and conversation were flawless. A young woman, in turn, would practice her own comportment, from the way she curtsied to the way she held her fan. Even the choice of dance partner carried meaning, signaling interest, social alignment, or family approval. The stakes were high, and every movement was scrutinized for propriety. Conversation itself was a delicate art. Young men and women engaged in polite, measured exchanges that adhered to strict codes of etiquette. Topics of discussion were carefully chosen to avoid offense, impropriety, or the appearance of impropriety. Humor had to be gentle, compliments had to be subtle, and any expression of emotion had to be restrained. A single misphrased word or poorly judged joke could undermine weeks of careful effort and damage a young person's reputation. In this environment, communication was both an opportunity and a minefield, requiring constant vigilance and sophisticated social awareness. The slow pace of courtship also allowed for observation and evaluation. Families, friends, and society at large were deeply involved in assessing the suitability of potential matches. Young people were expected to demonstrate not only personal qualities such as charm, intelligence, and virtue, but also social awareness, tact, and adaptability. These qualities were scrutinized over months, sometimes years, of interaction. The process was not merely about individual compatibility. It was about social alignment, family interests, and long-term security. The heart's desire was only one element in a complex equation of propriety, prudence, and strategy. Despite the constraints, moments of genuine connection could occur, often in the smallest gestures. A shared smile across a crowded room, a fleeting conversation under the watchful eye of a chaperone, or a carefully crafted line in a letter could convey profound emotion. These moments were treasured precisely because they were rare and fragile. The intensity of emotion was heightened by the limitations placed on expression. Longing, anticipation, and careful observation became central elements of the Victorian courtship experience, creating a world in which every feeling, however subtle, was amplified by circumstance. Distance and separation also played a significant role. Young people were often limited in their ability to meet freely, and travel could be slow and challenging. A young woman in a rural village might have only occasional opportunities to visit the nearest town, where she could encounter potential suitors. Similarly, a young man might need to travel for work, education, or family obligations, further constraining opportunities for interaction. These periods of separation could be both frustrating and exhilarating, heightening anticipation and deepening the emotional intensity of every subsequent meeting. The slow, deliberate pace of courtship demanded patience and emotional control. Young people learned to regulate their desires, to interpret subtle signals, and to respond with restraint. The process fostered skills that were as much about self-discipline as about social navigation. It required keen observation, empathy, and the ability to read unspoken cues. In this way, the challenges of Victorian courtship shaped not only romantic outcomes but also personal development, social intelligence, and emotional resilience. Letters continued to play a crucial role in maintaining connection over time and distance. A single letter could be read and reread, treasured as a tangible expression of affection. The language of these letters was often coded, nuanced, and layered with meaning. Expressions of admiration had to be balanced with discretion. Declarations of feeling were veiled in careful phrasing. A young person's ability to compose and interpret these letters became a key skill in the art of courtship. Each word, each carefully constructed sentence, carried weight far beyond its literal meaning. Family influence remained omnipresent throughout this slow dance of love. Parents and guardians monitored interactions closely, guided decisions, and often had the final say in matters of marriage. Their involvement could both constrain and protect, ensuring that young people navigated the challenges of courtship without overstepping social boundaries. Yet this oversight could also create tension, as personal desires were weighed against familial expectation. Negotiating this dynamic required tact, patience, and careful judgment, further slowing the process and heightening the emotional stakes. Social hierarchy further complicated matters. Young people were expected to maintain associations within their own class and social circle. Interactions across class lines were discouraged and could be socially damaging. This limitation constrained opportunities for connection and added another layer of complexity to the courtship process. A young person's social environment dictated the range of potential partners, reinforcing the slow, deliberate nature of romantic pursuit. Every action, every gesture, and every word was a part of this intricate, slow-moving dance. Even simple physical contact was carefully regulated. A touch on the hand, a bow, or a fleeting embrace could carry immense meaning, yet had to be executed with perfect timing and propriety. These constraints made physical intimacy rare, subtle, and highly significant, intensifying the emotional impact of even minor interactions. The emotional landscape of this process was intense. Longing, desire, and curiosity were constantly tempered by restraint, propriety, and patience. Young people learned to savor moments of connection, to find meaning in subtle gestures, and to treasure the rare occasions when feelings could be expressed safely. These experiences fostered emotional depth, sensitivity, and a nuanced understanding of human relationships. Even the passage of time was carefully measured. A courtship could last for months or years before a formal proposal was considered. Young people were expected to demonstrate consistency, reliability, and adherence to social norms throughout this period. Their behavior was constantly observed, assessed, and interpreted. The slow pace reinforced the importance of patience, discipline, and careful judgment in all interactions. Yet, despite these constraints, moments of joy, connection, and affection could and did emerge. The intensity of feeling was amplified precisely because of the limitations. Each carefully supervised meeting, each coded letter, each subtle exchange of glances became imbued with significance. The slow, awkward dance of Victorian courtship was, in many ways, a testament to the resilience, creativity, and depth of the human heart. The challenges of this process shaped character and personal development. Young people learned to navigate social norms, manage emotions, interpret subtle signals, and communicate with precision. These skills were essential not only for romantic success, but also for broader social navigation. Courtship became an arena in which intelligence, empathy, and social acumen were honed, providing lifelong benefits beyond the romantic sphere. In reflecting on the slow, awkward dance of Victorian love, one can imagine a young woman sitting by candlelight, reading and rereading a carefully written letter, savoring every word while considering the implications of every gesture. A young man might pace a quiet garden, rehearsing the proper phrasing for conversation, considering every possible reaction, and imagining the countless ways his intentions might be interpreted. These moments, steeped in patience, caution, and anticipation, reveal the extraordinary care with which young Victorians approached the pursuit of love. It is this combination of slow pacing, careful strategy, and heightened emotional intensity that defines Victorian courtship. The process was deliberate, constrained, and often frustrating, yet it also allowed for profound emotional experiences. Every interaction, gesture, and letter carried meaning far beyond its surface appearance. The slow dance of love in this era was both an art form and a test of character, requiring patience, wisdom, and resilience. Ultimately, the slow, awkward dance of Victorian courtship reminds us of the extraordinary lengths to which young people went to navigate social expectations, protect reputations, and pursue genuine connection. It was a world of subtle gestures, careful communication, and measured emotion, a world in which the human heart found ways to flourish even amidst constraints, and in which love, patience, and discretion were inseparably intertwined. In Victorian England, the rhythm of courtship was profoundly shaped by the expectations placed upon men and women. Gender roles were rigidly defined, forming the invisible architecture of society, influencing every interaction, every gesture, every glance between potential lovers. To understand how deeply these expectations affected dating, we must step into the lives of young Victorians and consider the subtle, pervasive pressures that guided their actions, thoughts, and emotions. Young women were bound by the ideals of modesty, virtue, and decorum. From an early age, they were taught that their behavior, appearance, and even speech were reflections of not only themselves, but also their families. A single misstep, a revealing comment, an unguarded laugh, or a gaze held too long could ignite gossip that might follow them for years. The notion of propriety was a constant companion, guiding their choices in every interaction, especially those with young men. The socialization of women emphasized restraint, careful observation, and patience. They were expected to be composed, graceful, and elegant at all times, especially during occasions where courtship could take place. Their emotions, while genuine, had to be tempered, coded, and often hidden from plain view. Young men, on the other hand, navigated a different, though equally restrictive, set of expectations. They were encouraged to be bold, confident, and assertive, yet never aggressive. Charm and wit were prized, but too much forwardness could result in scandal or rejection. Men were expected to initiate courtship, but their actions had to remain within the boundaries of propriety. The ideal Victorian gentleman was polite, respectful, and socially aware, skilled not only in manners, but in the subtle art of communication and observation. A misjudged word, a gesture too daring, or an overstep of social norms could end a courtship before it began. These gendered expectations created a delicate, almost paradoxical dance. Women had to convey interest without being forward, while men had to express desire without appearing presumptuous. Each party needed to read the subtle signals of the other, interpret glances and gestures, and respond appropriately, all while adhering to societal standards. The stakes were high because reputation was everything. A woman's reputation, once tarnished, could jeopardize not only her romantic prospects, but her family's social standing. A man's misbehavior could be seen as a reflection of moral weakness or a lack of refinement. The rules extended beyond public behavior into private correspondence. Letters became a vital tool for expressing emotions safely. Women could articulate admiration or affection in carefully worded phrases, while men used letters to demonstrate sincerity, respect, and moral character. However, even these letters were subject to scrutiny. Families sometimes read or monitored correspondence to ensure that no impropriety occurred. The language of love became coded and nuanced, a careful balance of honesty, decorum, and strategic expression. Every word was chosen with care, every phrase imbued with layered meaning. The art of letter writing became central to navigating the restrictions of gendered expectations. Physical interaction was even more heavily regulated. Touch, though a natural expression of affection, was fraught with risk. A hand lightly brushed, a bow, a gesture of assistance, each carried potential for misinterpretation. Social norms dictated that any physical contact be brief, deliberate, and entirely proper. A young woman might offer a delicate hand for a gentleman to hold momentarily, or a man might escort a lady with a precise attention to posture and positioning. Even these small interactions were imbued with significance, reinforcing the delicate balance of gendered roles and the constant awareness of societal observation. The concept of virtue played a pivotal role in shaping expectations for women. Young ladies were expected to embody moral purity, innocence, and self-restraint. Their behavior was scrutinized not only in private but in public, and adherence to these standards was seen as essential to both their personal and familial honor. Social gatherings, church events, and family occasions became stages upon which women demonstrated their propriety, their ability to maintain composure, to speak with elegance, and to navigate subtle social cues became a measure of both character and desirability as a potential bride. For men, virtue was defined differently, emphasizing honor, reliability, and moral integrity. They were expected to provide, protect, and uphold social standards. A gentleman's suitability as a suitor depended not only on wealth and education, but also on his adherence to social norms and ethical conduct. Any deviation from these expectations could jeopardize not only his romantic prospects, but also his reputation within the wider community. The pressure to conform, while different from that placed on women, was no less intense, requiring constant vigilance, self-discipline, and social acumen. The interplay between these expectations created a complex landscape for romantic expression. Young people had to navigate a world in which their desires were constantly filtered through societal norms. Interest had to be expressed subtly, attraction had to be demonstrated without impropriety, and affection had to be conveyed with both skill and caution. This environment demanded not only emotional intelligence but also strategic awareness. Young men and women learned to interpret minute details, eye contact, posture, tone of voice, and the cadence of speech, using these as guides for understanding one another's intentions. Even the timing of interactions was crucial. Women were expected to demonstrate patience and restraint, avoiding overt expressions of desire, while men had to gauge the appropriate moment to signal interest or advance a courtship. Too soon, and they risked scandal; too late, and they might miss an opportunity. This created a tension-filled dynamic, a constant negotiation of social and emotional signals that demanded attention, perception, and patience. Education and accomplishment were also gendered markers of suitability. Women were often trained in music, art, needlework, and language skills, all of which reflected refinement and social standing. These accomplishments were not only markers of personal ability, but also indicators of a family's status, wealth, and propriety. For men, education and professional promise signaled capability, responsibility, and the potential to maintain a household. The careful cultivation of these skills reinforced gendered expectations, shaping both personal identity and romantic prospects. The emotional consequences of these expectations were profound. Young people experienced real desires and affections, yet they were constrained by a need for discretion and propriety. The inability to openly express feelings often led to frustration, anxiety, and longing. Yet, this constraint also heightened sensitivity, observation, and emotional acuity. Every gesture, every word, every glance became a carefully considered element in the dance of courtship, creating a rich, albeit restricted, emotional world. Family oversight remained a constant presence. Parents guided, monitored, and sometimes intervened, ensuring that young people adhered to societal norms. For women, this often meant strict supervision in social settings, careful control of correspondence, and guidance in interpreting a suitor's intentions. For men, it might involve mentorship in social behavior, advice on appropriate conduct, and expectations regarding provision and responsibility. The family's influence was not merely an external pressure. It shaped the very way young people thought about relationships, self-expression, and the boundaries of propriety. Religious and moral frameworks further reinforced these gendered roles. Conformity to religious expectations, adherence to moral codes, and the demonstration of virtue were seen as essential qualities for both men and women. Deviation from these standards could result in social ostracism, damage to reputation, or the loss of marital prospects. The weight of these expectations extended beyond personal preference, embedding romantic decisions within broader cultural and spiritual structures. Despite these constraints, young Victorians found ways to navigate the complexities of gendered expectations with creativity and subtlety. Flirtation became a delicate art, expressed through glances, conversation, and carefully orchestrated social interactions. Letters served as conduits for feelings that could not be spoken aloud, while dances, walks, and social gatherings offered opportunities for regulated intimacy. Each success, however small, was celebrated, and each misstep became a lesson in the intricate rules of engagement. The slow and careful negotiation of gendered expectations shaped the character, emotional intelligence, and social skills of young people. They learned patience, observation, empathy, and self-control. They became adept at reading subtle cues, interpreting intentions, and responding appropriately. Courtship, though constrained, became a training ground for the skills necessary not only in romantic relationships, but also in navigating the broader social world. In reflecting on the role of gender expectations, one can imagine a young woman practicing her posture, her speech, and her gestures before a mirror, aware that every motion conveys meaning. Similarly, a young man rehearses his greetings, his conversation, and his attentiveness, understanding that his actions are observed and interpreted by many. These preparations, while meticulous, also illustrate the dedication and care invested in courtship. Each action, no matter how small, carries significance, revealing both character and social awareness. Physical expression of affection remained rare and subtle. Touch was minimal, controlled, and meaningful. A hand lightly offered, a bow, or a gesture of guidance conveyed feelings without breaching propriety. The anticipation and restraint amplified the emotional intensity, making each permissible moment of contact resonate deeply. Young people learned to treasure these fleeting interactions, finding joy in subtlety and meaning in restraint. The combination of societal oversight, familial involvement, and rigid gender norms created a world in which love was at once fragile and intense. Young people experienced genuine emotion, yet had to negotiate a labyrinth of rules that dictated how, when, and to whom those emotions could be expressed. The slow, deliberate nature of courtship, shaped by gendered expectations, heightened emotional awareness, and fostered a nuanced understanding of human relationships. Over time, some young couples learned to work within these constraints, finding ways to express affection, admiration, and desire while adhering to societal norms. Letters became treasured artifacts, dances and social interactions became stages for subtle communication, and shared glances and gestures conveyed volumes. In this way, Victorian gender expectations, though restrictive, also nurtured creativity, emotional intelligence, and resilience. In the quiet hours, one can imagine a young woman writing in her journal, reflecting on a carefully exchanged glance, a subtle compliment, or a letter received. She considers the constraints, the expectations, and the meaning imbued in each interaction. Similarly, a young man might ponder the proper phrasing for a conversation, the timing of a gesture, or the interpretation of a subtle signal. These reflections reveal the depth of care, attention, and emotional investment demanded by gendered expectations. Ultimately, the role of gender expectations in Victorian courtship reveals a world in which love, desire, and connection were intricately intertwined with societal norms. Men and women learned to navigate a delicate balance of propriety and emotion, restraint and expression, observation and initiative. While these expectations constrained freedom, they also cultivated sensitivity, awareness, and the ability to communicate subtly and thoughtfully. Within these structures, young Victorians experienced the complexities, frustrations, and joys of romantic pursuit, finding ways to express the enduring human desire for connection even amidst the strictest of societal boundaries. In Victorian England, dating was not only slow and governed by etiquette, but it was also profoundly limited by geography, transportation, and social isolation. For young people of the era, opportunities to meet potential romantic partners were narrow, controlled, and infrequent, creating a sense of longing, anticipation, and often frustration. To imagine the life of a young man or woman seeking love during this period is to picture a world in which the desire for connection is constant, yet opportunities to act upon that desire are rare, carefully monitored, and shaped by circumstance. Many young Victorians lived in rural areas or small towns, where the pool of potential suitors was limited by both geography and social class. Villages might have only a handful of eligible individuals, and their interactions were shaped by family networks, community observation, and local customs. A young woman might only see a young man she admires on rare occasions, perhaps during church services, market visits, or social gatherings organized by families. Similarly, young men might encounter potential partners only during community events or formal occasions. The isolation imposed by living in small, tightly knit communities amplified the significance of each encounter. A glance across a room, a brief conversation, or a carefully orchestrated visit could carry immense meaning because such moments were so rare. Even in larger towns or cities, opportunities for meeting someone were constrained by social conventions. The streets were public spaces, but young women were not encouraged to walk freely alone or interact casually with men. Parks, theaters, and promenades offered possibilities for encounters, yet these were often highly supervised or constrained by social etiquette. Chaperones accompanied young women almost everywhere, ensuring that propriety was maintained. Young men could observe from a distance, engage in polite conversation, or exchange letters, but unsupervised interaction was considered improper and could damage reputations. This pervasive oversight created a constant tension between desire and decorum, heightening both anticipation and emotional intensity. Transportation during the Victorian era added another layer of limitation. Travel was slow, costly, and often cumbersome. Horse-drawn carriages, trains, and walking were the primary means of moving between locations. A young man seeking to court a woman from another village might need to plan a journey that required hours or even days, carefully considering timing, propriety, and social conventions. Similarly, a young woman visiting a nearby town for a social gathering or family obligation had to navigate the complexities of chaperonage, public perception, and transportation logistics. These practical limitations meant that encounters were not spontaneous. They were planned, deliberate, and often rare. Each meeting carried weight precisely because it was difficult to arrange. The isolation imposed by geography and limited mobility also intensified emotional longing. Young people learned to cherish letters, small gestures, and fleeting interactions, because these were often the only means of connection. A carefully folded note passed discreetly, a coded message hidden in the folds of correspondence, or a brief exchange of words during a supervised walk could become treasured moments, sustaining hope and affection over long periods of separation. The emotional intensity of courtship was magnified by distance, creating a deep sense of anticipation and a heightened awareness of every gesture and word. Family and societal expectations further constrained opportunity. Even when young people were in proximity, they could not act freely without careful consideration of propriety and reputation. Families monitored interactions closely, ensuring that young people adhered to social norms, observed appropriate behavior, and avoided impropriety. A young woman might be allowed to speak with a gentleman only in the presence of a chaperone, and even then, conversation had to be measured and polite. A young man could express interest only in ways deemed socially acceptable, avoiding any appearance of forwardness or impropriety. These constraints meant that the most ordinary expressions of affections, smiles, glances, gestures, had to be calculated, subtle, and carefully timed. Social events were both opportunities and tests. Balls, garden parties, dinners, and community gatherings offered rare chances for young people to interact under socially acceptable conditions. These occasions were meticulously structured, and every action, gesture, and conversation was observed by family members, friends, and sometimes the broader community. A young man might spend months preparing for a single dance or conversation, ensuring that his manners, speech, and comportment reflected both charm and propriety. A young woman, in turn, practiced grace, attention, and subtle communication, learning to navigate complex social dynamics. These rare interactions were laden with significance, and their scarcity heightened emotional engagement and anticipation. Letters became essential lifelines for young people experiencing isolation. Written correspondence allowed for sustained communication, emotional expression, and subtle courtship, all while maintaining propriety. A young man might write a letter expressing admiration, longing, or respect, carefully selecting words to avoid impropriety while conveying genuine feeling. A young woman might respond with equally measured care, balancing interest with restraint. The act of writing and receiving letters became a ritual, a way to bridge the physical and social gaps that separated them. The letters were reread, treasured, and sometimes hidden from prying eyes, carrying emotional weight far beyond the words on the page. This limited access to one another fostered creativity and subtlety in courtship. Young people learned to communicate through coded gestures, glances, and phrasing, developing a keen awareness of nuance and meaning. The scarcity of opportunities made each interaction precious and meaningful. A fleeting smile, a shared joke, or a moment of understanding became intensely significant, often remembered and reflected upon for weeks or months. In this way, the constraints of opportunity and isolation shaped not only courtship practices, but also emotional depth, perception, and sensitivity. Isolation also intensified feelings of longing and anticipation. The young people of Victorian England often experienced prolonged periods without contact with their chosen partners. These gaps created heightened emotional awareness as each interaction became a focal point for attention, reflection, and hope. The mind and heart learned to dwell on subtle details, analyzing gestures, interpreting letters, and imagining moments of connection. The absence of regular interaction made the eventual meeting, however brief or constrained, profoundly significant. Even within communities where young people lived close to one another, social norms imposed isolation of a different kind. Friendships between men and women were monitored, and unsupervised interaction was discouraged. Casual encounters, such as walking together or meeting in private spaces, were largely forbidden. This created an environment in which the very act of connection was fraught with social tension. Young people had to balance desire, propriety, and expectation, learning to navigate a landscape in which even ordinary social interaction could carry weighty implications. The scarcity of opportunity also highlighted the importance of patience and emotional regulation. Young people learned to wait, observe, and reflect, cultivating emotional resilience and self-control. A young woman might wait weeks for a single dance or conversation with a suitor, while a young man might endure prolonged periods of distance and limited interaction before receiving a response to a letter. These periods of anticipation fostered emotional intensity, making each interaction more meaningful and heightening the value of subtle communication. Isolation also had social consequences. Many young people never married, either because suitable partners were scarce, social constraints were too rigid, or opportunities to meet compatible individuals were too limited. Others entered marriages of convenience or obligation, marrying not solely for affection, but also for social, economic, or familial advantage. The emotional landscape of courtship, therefore, was complex, blending longing, anticipation, frustration, and hope within a framework constrained by geography, mobility, and social expectation. Even in urban settings, where opportunities were more plentiful, isolation persisted in different forms. Crowded streets, bustling markets, and social gatherings did not eliminate the constraints of propriety, family oversight, and social observation. Young people still had to navigate etiquette, gender roles, and class distinctions, limiting spontaneous connection. In many ways, the density of the population increased scrutiny and reinforced social norms, making casual interaction rare and significant interactions precious. The emotional impact of limited opportunity and isolation was profound. Young people developed deep sensitivity, keen perception, and a capacity for patience. Each social encounter, letter, or glance carried weight far beyond its appearance. Emotional intensity, anticipation, and longing became defining features of courtship, shaping not only relationships but also the inner lives of those experiencing them. The scarcity of opportunity fostered a heightened awareness of emotion, nuance, and subtlety, creating a rich and complex emotional landscape. Families and communities reinforced these patterns. A young woman might be restricted to supervised visits, monitored correspondence, and carefully regulated social events. A young man might be guided in his interactions, expected to demonstrate propriety, and observed for conduct and character. These layers of oversight amplified the sense of limitation, yet they also created opportunities for subtlety, creativity, and careful strategy. Young people learned to work within these boundaries, finding ways to express desire, admiration, and affection while maintaining propriety and avoiding scandal. The combination of geographic, social, and familial limitations created a unique intensity in Victorian courtship. Interactions were rare, deliberate, and meaningful. Long periods of separation, combined with careful observation and social monitoring, heightened anticipation, emotional awareness, and appreciation of subtle gestures. A glance, a bow, a letter, or a carefully orchestrated meeting became laden with significance, creating a depth of experience that is difficult to replicate in the modern world. Even mundane actions, such as attending church, visiting markets, or walking in the park, were influenced by social constraints. Opportunities to meet potential partners were structured by propriety, observation, and timing. A young person learned to navigate these spaces with care, patience, and awareness, cultivating skills of observation, interpretation, and subtle communication. Each interaction, no matter how brief or constrained, was an opportunity to connect, to express emotion, and to navigate the delicate dance of courtship. Letters and written communication served as essential bridges across isolation. A young woman might spend hours carefully composing a response to a suitor, weighing every word for propriety, nuance, and subtle expression of interest. A young man might draft multiple versions of a letter, considering tone, phrasing, and timing, ensuring that the message conveyed both affection and respect. These letters became treasured objects, read and reread, stored with care, and sometimes hidden from prying eyes. The act of writing and receiving correspondence created a sustained emotional connection, allowing courtship to persist even when physical presence was impossible. The emotional experience of limited opportunity and isolation shaped the way young people understood desire, affection, and connection. Anticipation became central to courtship, and patience was a virtue. Each moment of interaction, whether a fleeting glance, a supervised conversation, or the arrival of a carefully written letter, was heightened by scarcity, creating profound emotional resonance. Young people learned to treasure subtle gestures, interpret nuanced signals, and sustain hope over extended periods. Ultimately, the limitations imposed by opportunity and isolation defined Victorian courtship. Young people experienced a world in which romantic expression was rare, deliberate, and carefully monitored. The scarcity of encounters, combined with social, familial, and geographic constraints, amplified emotional intensity and encouraged creativity, subtlety, and patience. Even within these restrictions, young people found ways to connect, express affection, and navigate the complex dance of courtship. In quiet moments, one can imagine a young woman reading a letter by candlelight, savoring each carefully chosen word, reflecting on subtle gestures, and anticipating the next supervised meeting. A young man might walk slowly through a garden, rehearsing conversation, interpreting glances, and imagining the future. These moments, shaped by isolation, scarcity, and careful observation, reveal the extraordinary emotional depth and resilience of young Victorians navigating the slow, deliberate, and constrained world of dating. Even though opportunities were limited and isolation often pronounced, the human heart persisted. Young people adapted, finding ways to express affection, sustain connection, and navigate social expectations. Letters, glances, gestures, and carefully orchestrated meetings became the lifeblood of courtship, carrying profound emotional significance. The constraints of opportunity and isolation created a world in which anticipation, longing, and emotional intensity were magnified, leaving a legacy of delicate, intricate, and deeply felt romantic experience. In Victorian England, courtship was not merely a private affair between two young people. It was a highly public activity, constantly observed, interpreted, and commented upon by families, neighbors, and the wider social network. The stakes of dating extended far beyond personal feelings, intertwining with reputation, social standing, and familial honor. In this society where propriety was paramount, the whisper of gossip could travel swiftly and leave lasting consequences, and even the slightest misstep could transform a hopeful romance into a source of scandal. To understand dating in this era is to appreciate the omnipresent power of public scrutiny and the intricate web of social consequences that framed every interaction. Victorian society placed enormous value on reputation, particularly for young women. A woman's social standing, moral character, and marriageability were intertwined with public perception. A single moment of impropriety, an unintended glance, an overly familiar touch, a misjudged word could spark gossip and threaten not only the individual's prospects, but also the family's honor. This environment created a heightened sense of self-awareness, where young women were constantly conscious of how they appeared to others. Every gesture, conversation, and expression was measured, weighed, and calculated to maintain propriety. Even moments of private affection, carefully concealed from public view, carried the potential for exposure and subsequent scandal. Gossip functioned as both a form of social control and a form of entertainment. Communities were tightly knit, and news traveled quickly. Observations, rumors, and interpretations of social interactions were shared in whispers, letters, and at gatherings. The consequences of gossip were real and immediate, shaping opportunities for marriage, social alliances, and personal reputation. Young women learned to navigate this landscape with care, understanding that the smallest social misstep could be amplified.